Hey, how you doing? I'm John, nice to meet you. I am an expert in Python, Monty Python, just so you know. Monty Python's Flying Circus. If you have questions about John Cleese, etc., I was very sad last week when we lost Terry Jones. But no, I'm not an expert in the technical side of things. I'm honored to be here, to be invited here. The work that I do is really to support the practitioners and the experts, so I am not worthy. I bow in humble adoration, and I want to learn from you. So I'm talking today about what it means to be a kind leader. I'm really passionate in the last number of months studying things like altruism and compassion and how it affects leadership as humans. And I'm also talking about our work with IEEE. Disclaimer. I like saying disclaimer and disclaiming in an oratorial way. IEEE is its own large organization. These words are my own. They don't necessarily reflect all the formal positions of IEEE. So the work that I lead, there's a lot of cool stuff at IEEE. By the way, we're a nonprofit. I will pitch probably every one of you, enjoy, because we're volunteer-based. So we have about 3,000 people in the work that I lead globally, and that happens because someone will be talking to me and they'll be like, oh, IEEE should do that. And I'm like, oh, cool, you just volunteered. So I will happily pitch you. The work that I lead, as Marissa mentioned, is called the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. We see that instead of AI, just to be a little bit more specific about the areas. And ethically aligned design is a paper that since 2015, we've had 3 different versions of it. And I'm proud of it because it's about 600 volunteers that wrote it. It's over 280 pages long. It's Creative Commons, it's free. And after the first version went up in 2016, we put it up as a request for input. And one of my favorite things that happened in the whole process is we got a ton of people from China and Japan that said this feels very Western. So I said, awesome, that means you're now on a committee and help us make it less Western. And they did. So there's a chapter called Classical Ethics in Autonomous and Intelligent Systems that talks about things like Confucianism and Ubuntu ethics in Africa. So if you're unfamiliar with ethical traditions outside of the West, you really should get to know them, right? Because it is with no metaphorical, it's not even really a metaphor. The code under everything that we create is based on not just bias, like the negative or unintended bias that we have, but where we live and who we are. So if you don't know about Eastern traditions, Southern African traditions, etc., really recommend you read that chapter. And again, it's all free, so I can pitch free things for a long time. I'm part of the Standards Association. We're really proud. This is an eye chart. You'll be tested later. These are a ton of standards on AI, machine learning. Again, all these are open, free to join. And standards like the Wi-Fi standard that you're using Wi-Fi right now because of IEEE. And I didn't know this until 2015. I knew nothing about standards. They're incredibly powerful because this room, like a people in a room get together for 3 years, discuss how a piece of technology is going to work. They agree on it, and then that standard becomes incredibly powerful. It also starts to form a lot of international policy. And because it's soft governance, it's not hard regulation that tends to freak people out. Don't regulate too soon. So standards people tend to love. These are the standards I'm really proud of. There's about 13 that are focused on ethically aligned design. Things like accountability, transparency, how we feel, especially with data. We have to have people be able to access their data. We're big on sovereign data. So that as all the beautiful tools that you're all creating, we're all creating together are built, the humans whose data is often used know how to access it and share it in a peer-to-peer based manner. But if you disagree with me, awesome. I hear you volunteering to come and join one of our committees. That's pretty much what I say all the time. This is a governance project that we hope pretty soon is going to get approved. I won't talk too much more about it because it's not approved yet. Okay, cool. You just had lunch. I used to be an actor. I know a fact after lunch. The human body kind of winds down a little bit. Enjoy. So I want to do something with kindness. Do me a favor, put down, and I hate doing this in one sense because it's like, I'll put down my phone, but that's kind of the point. I want you to turn to the person next to you. You don't have to stand, but pick a person next to you. And I want a person A and a person B. Please go ahead, turn to the person next to you. You can do it. That's what humans do. All right, I'm gonna walk you through an exercise. Okay? So go ahead and say hi to the person next to you. and just pick a person A and a person B. Does that make sense? A and B. Okay. All right, now, and thanks, I know I always told you to talk to each other, so now it's going to be like me interrupting 7 times, but enjoy. So first of all, I used to be an actor, like I said. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Ready? And now push it out through your mouth. It's very meditation-oriented. You're trying to get to your center. Our center is actually here in our diaphragm. It's not up here. Do it one more time in your nose. Out through your mouth, okay? All right, now please stay silent, and here's why. I'm going to ask you to do something that I bet you haven't been asked to do in a while. Turn to your partner. Right now, please go ahead and turn back to your partner. Okay? Without talking, I'm going to time you for 30 seconds. Please stare into the eyes of your partner. Without talking, go. All right, now I want person A to ask person B this question. Where do you most need kindness in your life? And that person B answers, and then you switch. Go ahead. All right, and if you haven't switched, make sure to switch so everyone gets to answer. All right, if you would wrap up in about 5 seconds. So 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. So how was that? Anybody raise your hand? How was that? Were you freaked out? Were you like, I'm totally freaked out to look at someone I don't know? Anybody? That's the first time. Yep. What'd you think? Oh, okay, that's cool. Do you mind me asking why you weren't comfortable? And if you weren't comfortable telling me why you weren't comfortable, let's just be a regression cycle. We'll talk for half an hour. We'll talk later. We'll talk later. Is there anyone that hopefully did enjoy it? I saw a lot of people smiling and laughing, so maybe that was just massive discomfort. Go ahead. What do you think? Okay. Oh, they enjoyed it. All right. Thank you. Round of applause. Now, the reason I did that is I love talking about values and kindness. And I'm always fascinated. Let me ask you this question. If I was to ask you, like, what are 5 values in your life? Just throw out some words like friendship or family. There's no wrong answer unless you're like murder. And then like, just please leave. Anybody? Go ahead. Throw out some words for your values. Integrity. Trust. Integrity. Relationships. Fairness. All right, so what I found, I've done this talk for like 3 years of the values part. If I pushed you and said, give me 6 or 7 values for yourself, it's usually by about the 5th value where people are like, I like cheese, Game of Thrones. And this is where I'm going to make an analogy that you as the experts creating code, forgive me if this is not exactly correct. But I wrote a book called Artificial Intelligence, and the question I asked in the book is, how will machines know what we value if we don't know ourselves? And I do know people like Francesco Rossi at IBM and Ajung Moon at McGill, these people who are leaders in saying, what are the values that are going to be manifested, especially by things like robots, et cetera? But I'm always amazed, and this is for myself as well. I sometimes don't remember throughout the day what values are important to me and if I've lived to them. Like my family is an important value, right? So if I don't call my kids, I know that my well-being goes down. Same thing with kindness. For leadership, and I know it's a little bit of a stretch maybe, but I also wanted to show you from an ethics standpoint, you kind of did an applied ethics exercise just then, because you're just getting to know someone, and B, you're sort of getting to know their values, their perspectives, especially when you ask them, what do you need in terms of some kindness in your life? And like I mentioned before, even knowing culturally where someone is from, there's an applied ethics aspect to knowing, does someone have a utilitarian background, very binary? Does someone have a virtue ethics background, sort of do unto others as you would have them do unto you? But these are things for me, again, very preliminary research, but I also just feel like it's common sense. With regards to kindness, you have to be present. You know, you could be like, here's some flowers and throw them and like walk off, but like maybe connect when you do something. Be humble. I think it's hard to be arrogant and be kind. You know, oh, you look fantastic today. It just doesn't work. You know, I think humility for kindness is a big deal because of the third thing. It's also hard to receive. I don't want to speak for you. I'm speaking for myself. I am uncomfortable sometimes receiving kindness. There's sort of an intimacy to it at times. And also sometimes if I'm feeling insecure and someone says something kind to me, I right away go back and be like, no, you look fantastic. And I mean it, but the thing is, giving the gift is something that we all love to do. That's a rule, we love giving a gift. So then that means we also have to be able to receive it. It's a form of kindness to essentially say, thank you for giving me that kindness, right? Even if you don't say it in those words. And then also I think practicing it with our technology. I'm a fan of humans. I love technology. IEEE is the world's largest technology-based association. It was formed 100 years ago by Thomas Edison. It's got 160 countries that we have members in. It's 500,000 members strong. Awesome. The tagline is advancing technology for humanity. So it's the humanity part that we do the advancing of technology. And that's also why with kindness, I ask you to put down your phones and stuff because, you know, looking at the person next to you, it's a rare opportunity that's enjoyable to do. Okay, on to the leadership part, which is kind of the meat of the talk. We just finished a paper, it's coming out in about a week from IEEE, and it's called A Call to Action for Businesses Using AI. We were blessed to have people from Google, Intel, IBM, HP, Lego, Salesforce. And what we do, and I ran this committee, I always do this in committees, it's really fun. I say to these thought leaders, and these are people like Adam Cutler, Melinda Pribick at IBM, driving a lot of the design work for AI throughout the entire enterprise. I say among 10 or 12 or 15 practitioners, what are the top issues that you actually care about? And since you're all in the same industry and you're all colleagues, talk amongst yourselves. And then what you think is most important, like you talk about when you're getting coffee at this conference, write about that. So we did. This paper, when it comes out, is going to be free, Creative Commons. It's also going to be a request for input. So talk to me after. I'll give you a card. That's my cheesy way of saying, come get my card. And again, I'll pitch you, enjoy. But this will be downloadable. These are the 4 sections I'll talk about briefly, just to give you a sense of what the paper is about. Now, again, I know you guys are more in general tech focused, but what I know in my past life, I was an EVP of a top 10 PR firm. And even then it was social media. It wasn't AI and machine learning, but the CIO, the CMO, there tends to be little battles sometimes, not battles, but they have to communicate. And this is what we found is really happening right now in the enterprise world in terms of AI and ethics. Not battles, but the desperate need for communication. And by communication, people that, you know, again, the experts here in the room saying, well, this is how this stuff actually works, right? And I work with engineers, right? Oh, did you have a question? Oh, a chief marketing officer. Cool, how many marketers in the room? Not to tease you. 17, 1, okay, great. No, thank you, that was a great question. And CIO, I assume you know what CIO is? It's the chief incubation, no, I'm kidding. It's the chief information officer. And there I just mean like there's the tech side of things and the marketing side of things. When I was in PR, and it wasn't like nasty, but there was sort of like the engineers and the people building stuff were like, the marketers get all this stuff wrong and they just want to talk about the bells and whistles. And the marketers were like, the engineers, I can't even understand what they're saying. And that doesn't work, and that's why I go back to the kindness. A lot of kindness is just saying we both have worth and we have to speak to each other well. Anyway, the first part of the paper is just a lot of stats because we wanted to show people you can think that AI ethics is strange or not you, but one can think it's strange or not going to work, but these initial this first one here is pretty massive. Capgemini did 4,400 consumers. And of them, a third of them said they'd stop working with companies if they didn't trust the company. And this is from like 5 months ago. A third of the customers, the consumers, interview said, if you freak me out, X company, with your AI, I will not use you. When I was in PR land, that number was like, okay, we're now dedicating money and resources to this issue. I won't read this whole thing, but creating a sustainable culture of AI ethics. What we found, like the woman from Google who was in our committee, these are massive organizations. It takes a long time to disseminate new ideas. It's like if you know in marketing or agile for marketing, right? It wasn't like someone was just like, hey, let's do a scrum. And right away, do people know what agile for marketing is? Anybody? Yeah? Okay, I see some hands. All that means is like any new thing in a company, it takes time. You have an evangelist, then a team of evangelists. Then they figure out how to talk to the different departments in ways that are relevant for them. So that's what we're finding is happening. Hopefully you read this while I was talking. I won't read the whole thing, but this is how you do creating that culture. And again, this paper is coming out soon, so I'll be able to send it to all of you if you're interested, and I hope you are. Skills in hiring. Gartner said that within, just a few years, 75% of large organizations will hire specialists in these different areas that somehow relate to, air quote, ethics. Kathy Baxter, who's a good friend from Salesforce, doing a ton of great work in the B2B, business to business world, said this, that a lot of AI ethics experts, the ethics expertise is more like they might come from human rights or anthropology or philosophy or marketing. But what Kathy said is it was really hard to hire for someone that was an AI ethics expert. And this is where especially all of you in the room with the expertise that you have, you're that much more marketable and awesome because you can train people like me who know the ethics or the philosophy side, but really need a basic level of understanding about whatever it is, Python, R, etc. Not that we're going to be practitioners like you, right? But this is what's critical. I'm very good at being in a room full of engineers and saying, I don't really understand that. Can you explain it to me in the way that I could talk to my mom or something, right? And once they can do that, then I can take that and take it to a whole other world of marketers and whoever else that are going to support the awesome work being done by the engineers. So I bring this up to say that a lot of times, and this is what Kathy said, she is going to the machine learning data scientists and saying, can you give some introductory courses to my new hires who know the ethics, etc. And then what's awesome is when they cross-pollinate and talk together and they learn what value they have for each other. And the kindness again comes into play. This is a first draft of this AI ethics readiness framework, and there's these 4 areas. I was thrilled that the committee did this. The logic is just you identify. Is your company not really doing anything? Then maybe you're lagging. And that's where you can say on the top. And then the left is in these different areas. Leadership buy-in is huge. AI ethics, are your leaders like, we think AI ethics is crap. So it's crap. Like, if they do, then that means it may take extra time and take those statistics back to them and say, well, your customers don't think this is crap. They're really worried about trusting the systems that are now in their houses. And so we're developing it. Would love your help. Okay, in the last couple of minutes I have, and I'm just going to check on my time here. I have 3 minutes? I think I have like 5? No? But all right, you tell me.
5.
Okay.
4.5.
All right, I'll go through this last part fast. A lot of my work in the last 5 or 6 years has also been in economics. And does anyone know what's called the GDP and beyond movement? Does that sound familiar? That one in the back? So you know what GDP is, right? Gross domestic product. Yeah, raise your hands if you know what GDP is. By the way, this is a trick to have you raise your hands like every 30 seconds, because then you have to be like, take your phone from texting. It's a cheesy acting thing. So GDP, it's quite literally statistics, and it's an underlying code that quite literally has driven the planet for the last 7 decades. I recently was at a conference. I spoke at this conference called Bretton Woods in New Hampshire in the States. Bretton Woods is where GDP was born. And I think people think sometimes that GDP dropped from the sky, right? GDP is here, welcome to and it just all of a sudden controlled the planet. But when I talk about it controlling the planet, what GDP measures is largely exponential growth and backwards facing productivity. That's not evil, but it's very myopic. It does not measure, for instance, caregiving. Caregiving means, in general, women are not measured in the one massive metric that has dominated the world sphere for 70 years. That makes no sense. You know what else is not measured in the GDP? Is the climate. That is why the world is quite literally blowing up, right? So the opportunity that we have for kindness on a more societal scale is this idea of what's called the triple bottom line instead of just one. Profit's still there. And by the way, profit is not bad. It's when it's exponential. Exponential growth means that you can't just say, I'm going to make enough money to pay my bills. The answer is no. You're not worth anything until you can IPO at this level. And on the individual level, especially in the States, and I'm 50, this was true. The answer most of the time was, you'll be happy when you make this much money. And that means for the next 20 years, you're miserable. No, that's not the way to live. Especially because, not to be negative, but I'm a dad. I have a 16 and a 14-year-old. In the United States, teen suicides have increased 50% in the last 10 years. 50%. Why am I saying this? Not to bring you down, but the answer is, why are we not all talking first and foremost about saving the lives of the people who come after us? I'm also 50, as I mentioned. In America and Japan, the second leading cause of death for guys my age is also suicide. AI is awesome. AI for good, yes, but also never, ever, ever forget that the underlying code for everything we build, if it stays at just single bottom line, GDP, then that means in one sense we all still have the key performance indicators of exponential growth. And the other things, the planet and the people, fall by the wayside. That's why Greta said in New York at the UN not too long ago, to people my age especially, if you do not take care of the climate now, if you do not actually pragmatically change these things, we will never forgive you. And I'm a dad. I cannot picture my kids saying to me in 10 years, Dad, you went to all these conferences and talked about cool stuff and AI is awesome, but why didn't you focus all your efforts, or at least most of them, on the planet and helping people suffering? And this is the question I have. How can we define single bottom line mentality as progress or innovation if our kids and climate are dying? So I'll end on some good news because I brought you down briefly. But in New Zealand, Prime Minister Jacinda, I have a little crush on her. I think it's appropriate. It's an appropriate crush, you know. Anybody? Okay. She has created this budget that they're calling the well-being budget, and it's a perfect example of beyond GDP. On the right-hand side, see, transforming the economy. The economy doesn't go away. Profits are important. Money drives stuff. But look what else there. Mental health, seriously. Child well-being, right? Child well-being. And then they actually are spending so much time with the indigenous people, the Maori in New Zealand, saying these are the people who came before. It is also their land. We must bring them into the mix. What this means is you don't have to understand in the business world or the coding world what beyond GDP means. But now you know that along with, on the right-hand side, the focus on money and fiscal stuff, which doesn't go away, look at this wider lens, this beautiful wider lens, recognizing that as individuals, we are not just about making money, right? We are our mental selves, our kind selves, ourselves that want to take care of people who are suffering. And in terms of the planet, we can't go on thinking that the planet is going to be sustained that much longer. My daughter's 14, and we were chatting a couple weeks ago, and she said something about, she's like, well, when I'm 40, and she paused. And then she goes, well, if I'm still here. Anybody here a parent? That statement chilled me to the frickin' marrow. This is the statement that I want. All this beautiful work that you're doing, all this beautiful work that we're doing in IEEE, instead of it, we will never forgive you because you did all this awesome stuff. It's not that the stuff isn't awesome and it made money and that's cool. But for whatever reason, no one told you that along with profits, we have to prioritize. Prioritize. That means over profit for a while. Ooh, this gets scary when I tell people this in shareholder land, right? But so many things in shareholder land are changing. The B Corp movement, all these things. This is a solution. Why? Because the answer at the end of the day is, hey, if you want to keep prioritizing a single bottom line mentality, here's these options. Stakeholders, shareholders rather. You can also focus on the planet and people. And at some point, if they keep saying no, and they say the status quo works, then you know that for some reason, they're either scared, greedy, or lying. Or all three. Thank you, sir, in the front row. And by the way, that means we had the opportunity to help them and say, you're probably a parent. You probably know some kids. You probably live in the planet. Now is the time to break this 70-year-old tradition that started with a bunch of white dudes essentially in Bretton Woods 7 decades ago, where they weren't measuring women. They weren't measuring the planet. GDP wasn't built to measure those things. But now we must. And brothers and sisters, whatever the word is, in AI and machine learning, understand that the code you build is built on a much deeper global code that right now still says GDP is the one metric of success we'll use. The metric has to be triple bottom line. And then instead of our kids saying, we will never forgive you, they'll say this, we will never forget you. And that is a kindness I'm working to make happen. And with that, I will say thanks very much.
Questions? Now's the time.
Any questions?
Let's see.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Sure. Any awkward pauses? Anybody? No, I'm just kidding.
So there's one country in the world which is not using GDP as a measurement. So there's one country in the world which is not using GDP for measurement, and this country is Nepal. What do you think about this model? What you're presenting compared to that one?
What's your name?
Christian.
Nice to meet you. I'm John. Christian brought up a great point. He mentioned that there's a country using a different measure, and also Bhutan, right? Bhutan, no, that's okay. Bhutan's gross national happiness. Bhutan was inspired by a speech that Robert Kennedy gave about a year before he died called the Beyond GDP speech. And Kennedy was the first one who said, again, this is not an evil measure, but look at what it measures. He actually said things like when an oil tanker crashes into the side of an island, the GDP goes up because more jobs happen when to clean that oil up. However, the environment is not cleaned. In a traffic jam, GDP goes up because you're sitting in your car using gas. But no one would argue that well-being increases while you're sitting in a traffic jam. But Bhutan inspired so many places around the world, in particular the United Nations. The last 5 years, there's been these things called the United Nations World Happiness Reports. It's a little bit of a misnomer because it's not reports like, yay, happiness. You know, I'm eating this amazing Swiss eclair. Who had the eclairs at lunch? Anybody? Those things were phenomenal. Anyway, happiness here is about what's called long-term flourishing. In Greek, the word is eudaimonia, right? Long-term flourishing is not about your mood. Your mood is ephemeral. It changes on a regular basis. Your long-term flourishing has to do with things like Maslow's hierarchy of well-being. Do you have access to water, et cetera? Then do you have access to education? Do you have access to actually become the person you want to be? These things can be measured. Also, in the States, there's something called the Social Progress Index, doing similar types of measures. Many countries are using it. There's also something called the Genuine Progress Index in a number of states in the US, Vermont, New Hampshire, and they actually have a metric that measures caregiving. Interestingly, if you and your partner want to raise your own kids in any country, the GDP will only count the person who's leaving to go to work, not the person who stays home. If you hire a babysitter and pay them, then the GDP is measured. But the point there is the person who stays home to do the caregiving, male or female, is literally not seen. And sometimes people will say to me, but why would you want to count something as amazing as parenting? It's such a wonderful gift. And the answer is because it's such an important, critical thing to measure. And in these states, in the United States that measure these things, it's a very simple formula. It's not that hard. That person also works. And when you take into account these critical jobs done by people in this way, it turns out the GDP goes up. Anyway, so from your question, I'm talking a lot, except to say a lot of countries are mirroring Bhutan, like New Zealand, and seeing the benefits of recognizing that when you look at these metrics and say we're going to take account for these things like mental health for kids, it's a massive money savings. Right? You take care of kids when they're younger and they avoid mental trauma when they're older. It's billions and trillions of dollars saved. It's not just about, yay, let's be nice. It's about recognizing that when you ignore these things, same with the climate. You hear numbers like $1 trillion with the Green New Deal in the United States. And then you see if we don't do something like $1 trillion in the US, in like 5 or 6 years, it'll be multiple trillions of dollars to fix all the infrastructure that's been destroyed. Any other questions?
Should we, maybe like 2 minutes. One more question, and then
a short answer instead of
John
my 48
will be there
minute.
all the time, so you can use the break and the evening as well. But yes, let's go for it.
Hi, my name is Pierre. I'm from the US also, and I was wondering if you know of any GDP alternatives that are being developed out there, something of formal nature.
Sure. Hi, Pierre. Yes, the Genuine Progress Indicator I mentioned is taking place in a number of states. In our ethically aligned design, there's a whole chapter called well-being. We list a couple of dozen of different indicators in that just so people can start to know them. And then in Vermont especially, but they've adopted very what I would call progressive aspects of measuring these things. And same in California. They're doing a lot of stuff, especially in privacy, which is related to flourishing with new California data privacy laws. Anyway, thank you so much. Really appreciate your attention.